Friends, today's story is emotional, heartwarming, and full of hope. It begins with a talented marine biologist who returns to her hometown for the holidays. After spending many years away, she has built a successful career studying the ocean, but deep inside her heart still carries the pain of a love she lost 10 years ago. When she unexpectedly runs into her former partner, old memories and emotions start to surface. The peaceful holiday suddenly turns into a journey of reflection, forgiveness, and rediscovery. As they spend time together, the spark that once connected them begins to return, but both must face the choices and mistakes that separated them in the past. The story beautifully explores how time, distance, and personal growth can change people, yet true feelings often remain the same. It shows that sometimes life gives a second chance to heal what was once broken. Filled with warmth, emotion, and quiet joy, this story reminds us that love can be rediscovered, even after years of 40 silence. So friends, let us begin the recap of this touching and inspiring tale of reunion and redemption. Adrienne and her husband Jack are separated but co-parenting their two kids, Amanda and Danny. Jack wants Adrienne to forgive him so he can move back in, but she struggles to understand the sudden change. He's taking the kids on a trip to Orlando while she's heading to Rodanthe to help her friend Jean. Before leaving, she agrees to talk things over with Jack when he returns. At the inn, Adrienne confides in Jean, but Jean isn't pleased. Jack was never there for Adrienne when her father passed and was unfaithful. Adrienne feels torn because of the kids, but she reassures Jean that she'll be fine. Before leaving for Miami, Jean explains how the inn works and mentions that Paul, a guest from Raleigh who paid double for his stay, will be arriving soon. Paul arrives early and finds the lobby empty. He eventually spots Adrienne on the terrace, visibly emotional. She quickly composes herself and checks him in, explaining she's filling in for Jean. After showing him to his room, she sets dinner arrangements since he's the only guest. While preparing the meal, she sees Paul on the beach, arguing on the phone, but looks away since it's none of her business. At dinner time, Paul decides to join her in the kitchen instead of eating alone. Though Adrienne finds it odd, she serves him there and ends up dining with him. Adrienne soon finds herself opening up about Jack, unsure if they're even still married. Paul tries to comfort her, casually admitting he doesn't know where he lives. She notices he isn't there for the beach, and he admits he came to talk to someone. After properly introducing herself, she asks if he has kids. Paul, now divorced, has a son who's a doctor. That evening, they sit on the terrace, and Adrienne shares her father's tale about the glow in the sky. She reveals he passed months ago, and Paul offers his condolences. It's been a hard year for Adrienne, losing her father, dealing with Jack, and dealing with Amanda's teenage rebellion. Paul understands, having his struggles with his son. Later, he tries the sink, but the old pipes barely let the water run, leaving him frustrated. Meanwhile, Adrienne gets a call from Jack, pressing her about his offer, but she isn't ready to discuss it. She tries talking to Amanda, who remains distant, though Adrienne expresses her love anyway. Jack unexpectedly chimes in, saying he loves Adrienne too, catching Amanda's attention. Later that night, Paul stares at a photo of his son Mark, recalling painful hospital memories. Turns out Paul is a surgeon. The next morning, a run on the beach brings back guilt over a failed surgery, leaving him shaken. Skipping breakfast, he tells Adrienne he's heading into town and rushes off. Later, while placing fresh towels in his room, Adrienne's curiosity gets the better of her, and she snoops through his belongings. She finds a letter from Robert Torelson, leaving her intrigued. Meanwhile, Paul arrives at Robert's house, hoping to talk, but Charlie, son of Robert, angrily throws him out, refusing to hear him out. Paul insists Robert invited him, but Charlie refuses to listen, declaring no one has anything to say to Paul. Paul tells Charlie he's staying at the inn, but Charlie, still furious, kicks his car before Paul drives off. Paul returns to the inn, still fuming, and finds Adrienne carrying planks. She notices his mood, but he brushes it off and insists on helping. Frustrated, he drops the planks, growing even angrier. Adrienne offers to take over, but he refuses. With no choice, she tells him she's heading into town for supplies and drives off. At the store, the owner, is happy to see Adrienne after so long. Curious about the Torelsons, Adrienne asks, and explains that only Robert and Charlie are left, since his wife Jill has passed away. The family spent everything on a surgery with a famous Raleigh doctor, but it ended in tragedy. Back at the inn, Adrienne learns Paul plans to leave early and wonders if it's because of the Torelsons, mentioning how fast news spreads in the small town. This only angers Paul, who demands to know what she's heard. Adrienne stays silent and heads to the kitchen to prepare dinner, frustrating Paul. Eventually, he calms down and tells her the truth. Jill had a hemangioma on her cheek, a condition he had successfully treated so many times in the past, but her surgery failed, and she passed away. Robert filed a lawsuit against him, but later sent a letter asking to talk, which is why Paul came to Rodanthe. Adrienne sympathizes, sensing how painful it must have been to be blamed for Jill's death. Paul offers to leave if his presence bothers her, but she doesn't seem affected and instead mentions dinner. Later, on the beach, she updates Jean over the phone, who playfully teases her about Paul, making Adrienne laugh. During dinner, she shares pictures of Amanda and Dan, telling Paul about them. When she asks about his son, he reveals Mark runs a clinic in Ecuador, but they're estranged and haven't spoken in a year. Mark was there when Jill passed and was upset that Paul had a nurse deliver the news instead of doing it himself. Paul argues he had other surgeries, and it wouldn't have changed the outcome, but the decision drove a wedge between them. Still, he plans to visit Mark soon. To lighten the mood, Adrienne takes Paul upstairs to a room filled with artifacts from Jean's great-grandmother. He notices a painting of Adrienne as a teenager, and she shows him one with Amanda and Jean. Spotting a small wooden box, he learns she made it herself, a craft she picked up from local women for safekeeping special things. When he asks what she'd keep in hers, she mentions her children, Jean, and memories of her father. Paul wonders who keeps her safe since she didn't mention herself. She opens up about love, family, and the sacrifices she's made, realizing she may have stayed in her unhappy marriage too long. Paul gently suggests she shouldn't anymore, but before she can respond, Amanda calls, and he steps away to give her privacy. It seems Jack has told Amanda about moving back, which angers Adrienne. Amanda insists she should give him a chance since she promised, accusing her of being selfish. Confused, Adrienne asks to speak to Jack and furiously calls him out for involving the kids in a conversation they haven't even had, reminding him he left for 7 months. Downstairs, Paul asks if she's okay, but Adrienne, too angry to talk, puts on music instead. She starts dancing, letting go of her frustration, and Paul watches with a smile. She goes to the kitchen for a shot, and Paul joins her. They end up clearing out Jean's pantry, tossing canned food and losing themselves in the chaos, laughing without a care. Eventually, Adrienne, having had too much to drink, calls it a night. The next morning, strong winds pick up, and she starts bringing in the terrace chairs. Adrienne tells Paul the Coast Guard has issued a hurricane warning and advises him to leave before the weather worsens. However, he couldn't get an earlier flight, so he's staying. Just then, Robert and Charlie arrive. Robert properly introduces himself, and Adrienne offers her condolences, suggesting they come inside to talk, but Robert declines. Paul meets him outside, and Robert asks what went wrong with the surgery. Paul explains that Jill had a rare reaction to the anesthesia, something that happens in 1 out of 50,000 cases. He's gone over the surgery countless times and found no one to blame. Robert, however, isn't satisfied. He asks Paul the color of Jill's eyes, leaving him speechless. They were married for 43 years, and now, she's just gone. After they leave, Adrienne, while boarding up windows, isn't pleased with how Paul handled things. She feels he defended himself instead of showing remorse. Paul insists he had to, given the lawsuit against him. Adrienne asks if that's how he'll defend himself when he sees Mark, frustrating Paul. He insists he's analyzed the surgery 1,000 times, searching for a mistake. But all that matters is he did everything to save Jill, which he tried to explain to Robert. Adrienne shouts that Robert didn't want an explanation, he just needed Paul to look him in the eye and apologize. She asks what he's so afraid of, and he turns the question back on her about her unhappy marriage. Fed up, she yells at him to stop and storms inside. The hurricane intensifies, forcing them to rush around, securing doors and windows. The storm proves too strong, knocking out the power and ripping off the boarded-up windows. Adrienne tries to power the inverter, but it fails, so she lights candles instead. As the house trembles under the force of the storm, a large shelf begins to topple. Just as it's about to hit her, Paul pushes her out of the way, and they both crash to the floor. Shaken, she instinctively clings to him for comfort. The closeness stirs something between them, leading to an intense, passionate kiss. The next morning, Paul wakes up alone and searches for Adrienne, eventually finding her sitting by the beach. He joins her and asks if she's okay. She reveals that Danny had an asthma attack, and Jack had to rush him to the hospital. Though Danny is fine now, she feels guilty for not being there. Paul tries to comfort her, insisting she shouldn't blame herself, but Adrienne doesn't take it well. She snaps, stating that she can't just do whatever she wants like him, and storms off. Later, while she's cleaning up the house after the hurricane, Paul apologizes. He admits he envies the love she pours into her children and wishes he had that bond. He tells her any man would be a fool not to realize how lucky he is to have her, then heads out. Moved by his words, Adrienne rushes after him, and together, they drive to Robert's house. Upon arriving, Robert shows Paul a picture of Jill, admitting she was the most beautiful woman he had ever known. She had always had the cyst, but he never thought it diminished her beauty, though Jill didn't feel the same. Wanting to look beautiful for Robert, she eventually decided on the surgery, and he agreed, which eventually led to tragedy. After hearing about Jill's incredible personality, Paul becomes deeply emotional and sincerely apologizes for Robert's loss, moving Robert as well. Later, Paul and Adrienne take a walk along the beach. She's grateful to have witnessed the emotional moment, and he's equally glad for her presence. Their connection leads to a passionate kiss, as Paul finally feels at peace with himself again. In the evening, they attend the Rodanthe crab celebration in the square, enjoying a lively night with the locals, dancing and eating together, happy in each other's arms. Later, they share a private moment on the bridge, slow dancing under the night sky. The moment builds into a passionate kiss, and back at the inn, their desire intensifies, leading to an unforgettable night together. The next morning, Paul shows Adrienne the trails leading to the mountains where Mark is. He then traces her body with his finger, following with soft kisses, leaving her breathless and giddy. Paul admits he doesn't know how long he'll stay with Mark, but Adrienne doesn't mind. She urges him to stay as long as needed to mend their relationship. Afterward, she walks him to his car, and he gives her one last kiss before driving off. But missing her already, he stops, runs back, and pulls her into a passionate kiss before finally leaving. Back home, Adrienne decides to end things with Jack for good, but Amanda isn't happy. She tries to reassure her that Jack will always be their father and she'll always be there. But Amanda, overwhelmed, storms off, refusing to acknowledge her. Over the coming months, Paul and Adrienne exchange letters, sharing their journeys and deepening their love. Paul mends his relationship with Mark, and Amanda slowly starts to come around. Adrienne rediscovers her purpose and takes up woodworking again. On the day of Paul's arrival, she eagerly prepares, thrilled to reunite with the love of her life after months apart. But Paul never shows up, leaving her devastated. She calls the airline for information, but gets no answers, sinking further into sadness. The next day, Mark arrives with heartbreaking news. Paul is gone. Adrienne is shattered, refusing to believe it. Apparently, a storm caused parts of the mountain to collapse, and Paul was crushed inside the house while retrieving medical instruments. Mark is equally devastated and regrets losing Paul just as they were reconnecting. Through tears, he tells Adrienne she changed and saved Paul. But with unbearable pain, she whispers that they saved each other. After Mark leaves, Adrienne goes through the box of Paul's belongings and breaks down in pain, reading his unsent letter about their future as a family. She falls into deep grief for days, leaving Amanda to care for Danny. Eventually, Amanda apologizes for how she treated her, tearfully admitting she now understands how Jack hurt her. She insists she's old enough to know the truth, and Adrienne finally opens up about her love for Paul. In an emotional moment, she shares photos and the letters they exchanged. At the inn, Adrienne reminisces about Paul. While walking on the beach, she spots some horses running past, something Paul had promised she'd see one day. Amazed, she feels his presence, which makes her laugh, bringing her comfort. Finally ready to heal, she takes the children to the beach and blows a kiss to the wind, sending her love to Paul. Though he'll always be a part of her, she chooses to move forward and embrace happiness again.